meltdown, on the other hand, is mostly sensory. So it could be that you experiencing a certain sound that sometimes you have the meltdown without actually knowing what's triggering it. You can't, most of the time, you can't communicate it in the moment because it's like a sudden trigger. It could be a sound, it could be a label on your clothing, it could be just sensory overload, like being in public. So that is the difference between between identifying whether it's ADHD related or whether it's ASD related. So in order to get an ADHD diagnosis, you have to have the criteria is that there has to be some of the characteristics which are exclusive to ASD. So in that circumstance, many studies define ADHD as ADHD is defined by impaired functioning in the areas of attention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity, whereas ASD is characterized by core social dysfunction and restrictive repetitive behaviors. So that is just like a scientific definition, which I don't know why I included, but autistic traits which are exclusive to autism would be your unresponsiveness to common stimuli. So basically that is, some sounds can be really, really loud, even though to your neurotypical person, it is just standard or soft. And then there's other situations where it is, you can listen to really loud music and that doesn't trigger you. There's situations where your body needs like a firm hug, like pressure, to the point where the pressure needs to be so severe that you actually have somebody lay on top of you to apply the pressure, because that's the stimulation your body's seeking at that moment. Other individuals can be very sensitive to pressure again. So the slightest pressure, slightest sound, slightest anything that affects their senses would set out a meltdown. So the other autistic trait would be intense focus and concentration on a single item. So whereas as ADHD individuals will have hyper focus when it's something they're interested in. So they have hyper focus in that moment. Autistic individuals will have hyper focus on a certain topic for years to come. It could carry on right through to adulthood. Like my son, for example, at the moment he's 10 years old. He is obsessed with animals. He was 2 or 3 years old when he got his first encyclopedia. He would sit on the loo and you needed to read it to him. And that exact same encyclopedia he is still reading today. And every day he comes to you with different information. Whereas his cousins, his age, would be watching cartoons, he'd be watching documentaries. He was a National Geographic fan and still is. So that focus remains, and it gets so intense that the intensity of the focus differs from ADHD, because it gets to a point where you don't eat, you don't sleep, you basically shut the world out. And I think that's where my burnout also came from, because I would work for 3 days in a row and not realize that I haven't eaten, I haven't slept, I was just going at it. And that is one of the autistic traits. The other thing is repetitive movement. So we tend to regulate ourselves with movement. So for my daughter, it is turning in circles. For my son, it is pacing. For me, it is rocking. And yes, as adults, you still have that repetitive movement because it calms you down. One of my associates was telling me about, one of the members had asked a question in the week. The dad is neurotypical. So his daughter was rocking on a chair in class, and she's in a special needs school. But what they did was they were scared that she was going to knock us, that she was going to fall over with the chair. So they removed her from the chair. And because of that, she completely freaked out and she was hitting and screaming. They took her to the office where they put on a weighted jacket for her. She calmed down after the weighted jacket. So the response from the school was they think the weighted jacket works. From a personal perspective, the fact that they removed her from a chair and stopped her from regulating herself was an invasion of her own personal experience. They actually exacerbated the situation. In a situation like that, you would just stand by and try to make sure she doesn't fall. She, in all probability, calmed down, not because of the weighted jacket, but because she was removed from the situation that was causing her sensory overload in the first place. So there's a lot of misunderstanding when it comes to how people with autism actually regulate themselves. And it causes more harm to actually stop the stimming than just allowing them an environment, where they are safe and they can stim and calm down. The other autistic trait would be avoiding eye contact. As time goes by, you develop the ability, or not the ability, but you are able to sort of force yourself to do it. And that comes with learned behavior, like from learning from your peers, or basically if you've been through ABA. So that is one of the autistic traits that you would find that wouldn't be common with ADHD. And then withdrawn behaviors. Autistics are not very social people. They actually choose to be by themselves most of the time. And so they tend to get preoccupied with their own thing. I always used to sit and watch my daughter. She would just amuse herself all day long, and there could be friends around and she would just be doing her own thing. So that is one of the other things, withdrawn behavior. I enjoy my own company as well. I'm not sure if it's just because of social anxiety or because of me really enjoying my own company, but I can keep myself busy for days on end. So those are the autistic traits. So ADHD, for individuals with ADHD, life is so much harder because with the ASD diagnosis, you've got this challenge of having ADHD as well. So it's more severe. So your experiences are more severe. And the internal conflict, or the internal need to satisfy both your ASD and your ADHD, to cope with both of them, is basically a complete conflict, because you need that structure. You cannot function without structure. You cannot function without change. I mean, you cannot function with change. For me, change is one of the hardest things that I can experience. It is basically torture, because I'm so used to structure. I wake up, I have the same routine every day. I've got to prepare myself days in advance to actually have a change in structure. My meltdowns, I was actually paying closer attention to it after Sumaya asked about it in the last Zoom meeting. Basically, on the question you asked about, does it ever get aggressive? Or it does. When I was younger, it was throwing things, breaking things. Now I just spin out of control and I lash out at everybody. There was one meltdown about 2 years ago where I still have holes on the wardrobe because I was making holes with the scissors because I couldn't calm down. I couldn't regulate myself. And eventually I ended up the only way I could do it was by making holes, like banging something. So a lot of times it is perceived as aggressive or it's frowned upon, but in certain situations you struggle to actually deal with the overwhelm, with the sensory issues, that the only way is to physically, there needs to be some outlet, and that is basically the hardest part, and especially as an adult and having children. And I find that a lot of adults struggle to transition from adolescence to adulthood because you're not equipped, and there's so much it's ABA is very controversial, and I've been looking into it, and ABA might be controversial, but the other side, the flip side of the coin, is also individuals suffering with life skills. So there needs to be another path. There needs to be a middle road where individuals can actually express and be themselves, but also where you, like with my kids, I always question where to draw the line with expecting them to behave like neurotypical individuals, and which would then lead them to masking, and allowing them to actually just express themselves and deal with the emotions themselves in a way that soothes them. So that is basically an overview of autism and ADHD and the overlap, and how you would distinguish if it's a dual diagnosis, or if it's just autism, or if it's just ADHD presenting as autism or being perceived as autism. So it's all in the behavior, it's all in the root of the problem, the root of the situation. So when faced with that question, or when trying to figure out if it's autism or if it's ADHD, your answer lies in the root, because with ASD it'll usually be sensory, and with ADHD it'll be rooted in executive functioning.
Thank you, Bianca. Really appreciate it. Ivandra, if you'd like to ask questions.
I think Ivandra's hand is up from previously.
Yes,
but I just want to say, okay, there's it. Well done, Bianca, for pushing through.
Thank you.
The turmoil that we experienced before getting on with our South African load shedding and everything else. I just want to reassure a couple of people, those of you who shared your personal stories, we weren't recording at that time. So rest assured, even if this recording goes out, it was purely for Bianca sharing that information. So none of your personal shares will be on YouTube. I've sent the link on the chat, but for those of you who've missed it, maybe you can just email Tracy. But before we go into any questions, I just want to highlight a few very important points that Bianca brought up, which is extremely important. One, when you were discussing the meltdowns with regards to the aggression side of things, it's so important that, especially for the kids, to look at the why behind that aggression, because a lot of the time those outward behaviors are met with punishment and judgment. And it's quite simply, you know, when you're trying to describe it, what someone explained to me is that sometimes that outward impact of punching the wall and, you know, making holes in doors and that sort of thing, it's to match the inside chaos and turmoil that you're experiencing. And that's why that outward, you know, expression is so important. One of the things that I've noticed helped one of my clients with autism is bulking up on impact sport, which is something not all of us can get into. It's a very sensitive topic, because I know some people are getting into the whole rage room kind of thing. But my idea of impact sport would be, you know, the boxing, battle ropes, anything that gives you that satisfaction, because it appeals to the brain work that's craving that, you know, that outward expression. The other thing that you mentioned, which is super, super important, is the accommodations at school. You know, the stimming that's met again with reprimanding and punishment. It's so important to speak to your school and speak to the teachers, because I know there's one school that's doing really good work. They're a school based in Fourways. I don't want to mention them yet, but the teacher in particular has gone the extra mile to allow the child to stim and not interrupt that processing tool. And while they're doing that, she's even educating the other kids in school as to why this child finds it, you know, satisfying to stim in that way. And so it's not met with the bullying and the judgment and everything else. And it's so important to, you know, we need to create those environments for people who are struggling with these challenges. So thank you again, Bianca. It was
Yes, ma'am.
So sadly to say, Bianca, you and I are going to have to do this recording from the start again, because my electricity came on and I got excited, so I could stop you in my
Tracy.
Yes.
That's fine, because I'm recording.
Oh, that was
We didn't miss out, don't worry.
Okay, great. Wonderful. Okay, so you're off the hook, Bianca. Is there anybody who'd like to ask any questions? Thank you so much. It was really informative.
Thank you, Tracy.
Anybody else?
I would like to ask a question.
Oh.
My question is the life skills coaching or therapy that I have been doing for ADHD, is it supposed to help me to cope with both ADHD and ASD, if that is the case? And if not, is there something additional that can be done therapy-wise to be able that socially and functionally we can cope with both? As far as I have investigated, most of the ASD, a lot of the ASD patients, they don't end up getting to need any kind of medication. If they are high functioning and they cope with the cognitive functions that the ADHD people cannot cope with, like attention and so on. I have read here and there that some therapy works, but I wonder is there any specific level or modifications or structure of therapy that is recommended to cope with both? How is that managed?
Bianca, do you want to answer that?
Okay, so if individuals with ASD is medicated, it's usually with a mood stabilizer, which is your risperidone, your Seroquel. It actually helps a lot with sleep, which is a big problem with ASD, and just mood in general. Regarding therapy, it depends on what you as an individual, how you're experiencing your ASD. You've got to remember that ASD is not a one shoe fits all. It's just each individual experiences it so differently. So it'll all depend on how you're experiencing it, what your challenges are, and basically accommodating your natural response to it, but also equipping you with dealing it. But a lot of the therapy that's out there for ADHD does help. But like I said, it depends on what your individual ASD symptoms are.
If I can just add to that as well, is exactly what Bianca mentioned. ASD and ADHD, both of them are very layered diagnosis. And so it's exactly that, the same way that we shouldn't be, you know, having that one size, you know, fits all thing. Exactly. It's you got to see which skills work for you. And there's definitely a difference in skills. So I think this also touches on what Leanne shared earlier on, where she said she was previously researching ASD, and then she got diagnosed with ADHD, and now she's trying to obviously develop habits surrounding the ADHD. I think it's important to look at both, because while you habit formation and while you know working on those habits, and you pushing for a certain habit to work because you think it's with regards to your ADHD, it's important to consider that maybe that might not be in relation to your ADHD. And so to consider the other side of the coin, which is what she probably suspected, which is the ASD. So I think it's important, because it's so layered, to not have a one-track approach when it comes to therapy or skills. In fact, it would be negligent for us to have a one-size-fits-all, you know, therapeutic method. And so it's important to look at all sides of the coin and both sides of what ADHD and ASD has and where it overlaps.
So I think one of the very big things that I've picked up, and you've mentioned as well, Bianca, it's not about the label. It's about the support you need that comes with the label. So no matter what type of therapy it is, you need support. You need additional support. And I think that to me is key, and to find it whatever fits and is comfortable to you. So is it having a coach? Is it having a counselor? Is it having a friend? Is it having a mentor? But whatever you need, that's where the one size fits all doesn't work. But you do need additional support. Am I correct, Bianca?
Definitely. I'm not sure if you heard my previous video, but I saw over 10 therapists. I was in a therapist's office every other day, and nothing helped, because they weren't supporting my symptoms. They weren't supporting my needs. And they were trying to just encourage me to mask it. But because of all the masking, it was exploding. And I'm only on my journey now. And Tracy and I work individually to see where the need is, how I can support my need. And basically I do that with my kids as well. Both my kids are diagnosed with ADHD. And they're both very different. They both need different levels of support, different forms of support. So it's a very individual process.
And I liked what you've done, Bianca, if you don't mind me sharing, as recently there's been a lot going on and she had a meltdown, but she's now put together her own little kit box. And her own little kit box is things that work for her, which she's discovering, which is awesome. So it's a self-awareness. So
with a punching bag there.
So that's really cool that you're aware that this is what you need. So next time the build-up happens and you have the meltdown, you have the physical toolbox of things that work for you. That's so individual.
Do we have time for a hand up? I think Leanne and Shireen had their hands up.
Yes, let's go.
Thank you. Just very quickly, I think what was also intimidating is that worldwide it's, you know, there's scant help for females, particularly adult females, and apparently particularly in South Africa. So I'd be interested, and you don't need to list them here, but in like a list of therapists or doctors who can actually diagnose ASD in adult women.
You know, Leanne, that's such an interesting thing, because just this week alone, like since Dr. Jiwa has left us in the darkness quite physically with load shedding, I've actually spoken to a number of doctors over the last few weeks, specifically looking for people that are on the same page as us when it comes to ADHD and autism and everything else, because it's unfortunate that there are a lot of psychiatrists out there and doctors that are unfortunately negligent in their approach in therapeutic methods. And as much as some of the doctors didn't appreciate me interviewing them and asking them the hard questions, I had to, because we are desperately looking for people that we can trust to send our clients to, in order to not just, you know, sit with the diagnosis and give the medication, but to actually listen and be able to connect and ask those well-needed questions. So I think we're working on that. I think Tracy might have given you a name of a doctor that's on the same page as us, but we're definitely working on building a group that we can trust and circulate.
Yeah, and there do seem to be few and far between with regards to experience.
Yeah,
but yeah, we are definitely looking for that, and I think we have found one. But yeah, Evandra, if you'd like to give us your question.
Sorry, forgot to lower the hand.
Okay, no problem. Okay, so we're done with Leanne. Okay, thank you, everybody.
Shireen,
sorry.
Hi, everybody. I just need to ask, Tracy, you know, I'm coming from the situation with my son, and thank you so much for inviting me to the session. It's like really fantastic. I can't tell you, I wish I knew about this before, because it's really something that helps so much to listen and to be able to understand. But in listening to all the symptoms from the ASD and the ADHD and the circumstances of what happens, I just need to take a step back from all of what's been said and just ask the question is, would you think that the majority of people out there have not actually realized that they have got either one of the ASD or ADHD, they're suffering with it? And then the second question I'm asking is relating to that is, and I'm not saying there is anything that is normal in this world. Everything is like different, you know, there's nothing that can be classified in normal. But where would you find the balance, or where is the middle road, or how do you assume to think that people are? Or is it just generally the fact that people have maybe through their journey realized what works and what doesn't work for them, and they basically then just sort of put that in place that works best for them, and then they've relied on it and saw that it worked for them, and that's how they carry on? Where in fact we're all a whole lot of like almost actors on the stage, and we're all putting on these different masks and just saying things that are right and whatever else, but back at the right within ourselves, we all have got situations. And I'm not saying that we all don't need to, because it's normal, we're human beings and we cannot have perfection. I mean, that's asking for the impossible. But just asking, is there a middle road of sort? Does it exist? I don't know. I'm just asking the question because, I mean, everybody has to have a little bit of everything that you've been describing, being ASD or ADHD. I mean, it has to be, you know, you have to have a little bit of it, because that's just life and that's just people and that's circumstances and stuff like that. But how does it get to a point where it becomes diagnosed and then you realize that you are actually like seriously need maybe therapy, or you need to manage the system, the situation with medication or whatever? That's what I'm just trying to understand.
So that's a very, very valid point. And I do believe all of us we are imperfect, and we're born imperfect, we die imperfect. But I think it's when you start having problems in your life. So it's so difficult with ADHD because of all the comorbidities. And it's one size definitely does not fit all. But it's when it starts affecting your life, where you have, for example, you have a problem with authority. You start having problems with your teachers. You've got conduct disorder. So like ADHD, 90% have RSD. So that's rejection sensitive dysphoria. So it's when it's all those other things start interrupting and you can't function normally in society. Okay. And you can see that you need extra assistance. I think that's when it's worth looking into. The focus, obviously, for the ADHD is a big thing. Can you pay attention? Can you sustain attention? Is it affecting your classwork? Is it affecting your friendships?
Okay, I hear you. I understand. Okay, so it's when the impact becomes too much and it starts getting to a point where it actually causes you not to be able to function in a what you classify almost in inverted commas normal, like the rest of the majority is sort of like functioning, and then you realize then it's a bigger thing. Yes. Is that what you're saying?
Yes.
Okay.
It's disrupting and it's creating pain in your life. It's creating obstacles that you normally would be able to overcome, but in these instances, it's so much more harder.
I understand. Okay, thank you. That's very enlightening. Okay. Thank you.
Pleasure. Bianca, thank you for joining us. Thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight. It was really informative. We have recorded the session. If you'd like a copy, just WhatsApp me and I'll retransfer it to you. And next month, we will be talking about ADHD and comorbidities, which is really, really interesting. And we hope to see you all there and have a great month. Take care and look after yourselves. Thanks so much for joining us. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye. Thank you. And thank you, Bianca.
Bye.
Thanks, Bianca.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
Have a
Bianca.
good night, everyone.
Thanks, Bianca.
Good night.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone. Bye.